Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give it a few more minutes to let a few people trickle in, and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Faith Odom, and I am the Assistant Director on the Alumni Engagement and Inclusion Initiative team here at William & Mary. Welcome to our Alumni Admission webinar series focused on the benefits, the challenges, and the nuances of early decision, early action, and regular decision. With this series of virtual webinars, we seek to provide education on general topics related to the college application process. I want to take a moment to encourage each of you to be engaged during this webinar and ask questions as they may come up. I will now turn the webinar over to the hands of our admissions professionals who are so gracefully going to lead this webinar for us. I want to take a second to introduce Charles Carabello of University of Georgia and Juan Espinoza of Virginia Tech. I hand it over to you all to formally introduce yourselves and lead the way.
Sure. Juan Espinoza. I serve as Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment Management, as well as the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Virginia Tech. I'm a native of Virginia Tech. I grew up outside of the DC area in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm a graduate of Virginia Tech. Went down there for my undergraduate, and I've been in Blacksburg now since 1999.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlie Carabello. I serve as Associate Director for Admissions and Enrollment Management here at the University of Georgia, where I've been here since 2001. I actually, interestingly enough, attended Washington Lee University for my undergraduate experience, so very familiar with the Virginia area, and have been down here in Athens shortly after my graduation in the late 1990s, of all things. And a lot has changed in terms of college admissions, and I think Juan and I will be able to sort of lead a discussion and help give you all some overview of how that looks in today's landscape of admissions. Juan, anything you else want to add, or I can start prattling on about the maybe some of the differences that we all face. I think the one thing that I would mention to everyone is we are all representing public schools, but obviously if there are 3,300 plus colleges and universities in the country, there are that many different ways of doing college admissions. And there are certainly some advantages that you will find. But I think also the number one thing that I would tell students and parents alike is be mindful of all of the deadlines that the various schools may have for their different programs. But as importantly, find the time and the place that is right for you, in which you are the most comfortable. We spend a lot of time telling students that the right time to apply is when they're the most ready. And so it's not a race to see who applies first. And that is the case, at least at our institution. Juan, I don't know about you, but we have an early action time frame. We have a regular decision time frame. We haven't never, in my knowledge anyway, done early decision. And nuance is the right word, because if there's one thing that's true about higher education, we love acronyms and jargon, and we will use it whenever we get a chance. So just to set the table for everyone, early decision, at least as I define it, I think most places do, there is the reality that if you're applying somewhere early decision, you will be sort of making a agreement with that college or university that should they admit you, that's where you're going to wind up attending school the next fall. And so you will find that their deadlines tend to be a little earlier in the year, and maybe a little more aggressive in terms of when they do things. Early action at schools, irrespective of when it's held, tends to be non-binding, but it does usually give students a little earlier glimpse into where they stand with an institution. And there are a lot of routes that those decisions can make. So from early action, we will admit students, and they don't owe us anything until May 1, when they tell us that they are committing to come to the University of Georgia. We can decline students, and that's basically saying that, look, academically, at least, this probably isn't the right first step for you out of high school, and not another set of grades or test scores is going to change that. And then finally, we will defer some number of students to our regular decision process. And so that's important to remember as well, because we do use this jargon, and it can be really confusing. What I say may be totally different than what the private school down the road is saying, or another public is saying. So don't know what else we would like to throw in there, Juan. I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think you covered all the bases pretty well. The underlying theme here that Charles has touched on is, every college is going to do things differently. That is challenging. We recognize that. We recognize the challenges that go along with that. I have a high school senior this year, so I'm on the other side of the process, and I think I have a greater appreciation for how different everything is from university to university. And that's not done maliciously or even intentionally. It makes sense when you take a step back. Every college, every university has a different mission. They have different priorities. They have a different focus. And so in essence, their application process, which is, the key part of selecting who's going to be part of their incoming class, is going to reflect those different priorities. And so it does create challenges. As my high school seniors navigating the process, I continue to recommend and urge, and without hovering or being part of it, to take the time to really research, the intricacies of each process once she has narrowed down that list of colleges that she's going to be more actively pursuing, especially now that many application processes have opened up. I guess going a little bit higher of a wider overview, most colleges are either going to have a shared application platform. There's really two out there right now. You've got a coalition application. You've got Common App. Common App is the most popular one out there right now. It has over 900 member institutions. And then you're going to have some colleges that have institutional applications as well. So you'll have options to either apply on the shared application and send your information to multiple colleges, or you're going to be applying specifically and individually to some schools. And there's a flavor in between. You'll have some state, applications offered, depending where you're at. I know William & Mary's alumni base is pretty national and global, but it's just worth taking the time and investigating that. with early decision, we just announced we're discontinuing early decision. So we only have early action and a regular decision now moving forward. But being familiar with early decision, as Charles mentioned, it is binding. So it is a pretty serious commitment you're making to that institution. In essence, you're promising to attend, regardless of the financial consequences of that decision. And so if finances are a big part of your decision-making process, early decision is not the best place for you. Early action or regular decision is going to be. There are a small number of institutions that take it a further level with early decision, and William & Mary is one of them. They offer ED1 and ED2, essentially the same criteria as far as it being binding. This is giving you 2 entry points to submit your application by dates. And really the main difference between those two are going to be the notification dates. In essence, when the school circles back with a decision, a final decision for you. And so just be aware, again, you're just going to have different versions of very similar processes. You're going to hear a common term, holistic review, said by all of us. But you're going to see how holistic the review really is will vary by institution to institution. There are some schools that will identify themselves as holistic review, but when looking at the non-academic side of the application, it's pretty minor on the impact it will have on the decision. And you'll see a majority of colleges really trying to balance between the academic and the personal side of things. So what is the student doing outside the classroom? What is the impact are they having? And the sort of impact they're having will be dependent on the priorities that institution is looking for. So using Virginia Tech as an example, we're a land-grant institution. Service is a huge ideal and value held here at the institution. Our motto is ut prosum, which is Latin for dare mai serve. Service, as you can expect, is a huge part of our holistic review because it's a huge part of who we are as an institution and an important value. That may not be a case for an institution elsewhere in the country, and that doesn't make it wrong. It's just that they have a different priority. And whatever that priority might be is what they're going to be escalating and weighing a little bit heavier in their individual process. And so, again, it's gonna take some time to do the research. But fortunately, you've got some great resources. You've got counseling at your individual high schools. You have the admissions teams at the individual schools. I know some might view us as intimidating characters in this story, but we're here to help. Many of us do not view ourselves, I would say the vast majority, not many, but the vast majority, all of us, I would hope, view us not as gatekeepers, but as guides in this process. We're passionate about the institutions we represent. We're passionate about serving our applicants and students and prospective students interested in our university. And regardless of what the decision might be, we have learned there's multiple paths to enter our institution. And so although maybe the first year path isn't the best fit at this point, there's other paths, most likely I'm referring to transfer, that can still lead to the institution that we represent. And so we're going to be working hard. Our teams are going to be working hard to best represent the institution, but also to best serve these students and families. We recognize there's a lot of anxiety in this process. Again, I'm seeing it firsthand. And there's a lot riding on it, but there's also isn't just one school for your student. You'll find pretty quickly, I'm seeing this with my daughter, there's a lot of good fits. And where they end up, I really truly believe is where they're meant to be. And so don't feel that the pressure and the competitiveness that many of our colleges, including Virginia Tech, sometimes brag on when we say we have record applications year after year. Doesn't mean that we don't have a space for your son or daughter, and we're the only match for them out there, and everything else is a failure. So it's a balance, and just realize you got some great resources in place. This is a great topic because it represents one of the many different versions and intricacies that we've kind of talked about that vary from institution to institution. But at the end of the day, once you kind of learn the different terms, it's not that complicated either. And that's what you'll discover as you continue through this process. like anything, the more you learn about it, the more it makes sense and the easier you're able to navigate through it.
I want to jump in and touch base on a couple of things that Juan mentioned, and maybe dig in a little bit in on them for our audiences. I think at both of our institutions over the last couple of years, we've seen growth in applications as we have joined things like Coalition or Common Application, and more students are seeing us. That said, there is a competitiveness, which means that most of our applicants are carrying the same kind of academic record, at least if you look at it on face value. So we do spend a lot of time holistically reviewing and digging in and looking at what trends your grades are taking, the class patterns, and you may not think that we're interested in that. We're totally interested in how successful you're being. I usually use a somewhat scenario that, there's more than one route to get to a particular grade point average, and some students may have really struggled in ninth grade, but 10th and 11th and 12th, they've only been improving. And that may be one of the reasons why a student delays and says, I want to wait until closer to the regular decision deadline because I want this college to see my senior year grades, if it works within the timeline of the university that you're applying to, because that's showing that I've taken my most rigorous classes and I'm doing my best work and I'm ready for that next step. Conversely, I think we are all somewhat aware of junior senior slumping, and being aware of negative grade trends and trying to understand better what may be causing those, and if it's some external force that wasn't really under the student's control. We're trying to be mindful of that, but also just aware of those sorts of things. I think the one other thing that I think Juan and I could probably bring to light and play off of the way our institutions handle things is when you're making application, I think there sometimes is a thought or maybe even a concern that the particular major or the college within the university or the school within the university plays an outsized or maybe not even an important role in the admissions process. So at the University of Georgia, we are still admitting students to the university as a whole. There's not an individual major or school choice that makes it harder or easier to be admitted to UGA. That said, I'm still interested when a student tells me that they are wanting to pursue a degree in forest and natural resources, that they also maybe already have a background in that. And on the other side, is our School of Business very competitive? Yes, but you don't really get in until the end of your sophomore year after you've done their entry-level coursework. So just saying that you're interested in business doesn't suddenly make it more difficult to get in just because it's a selective school. They do that process on their own after the student's already been enrolled here. So, and I do want to follow up, just statistically, our Office of Institutional Research would tell you that like over 30% of the undergraduates here at the University of Georgia started somewhere else. They were transfer students. And so I do really want people to be mindful that there's more than one pathway of gaining admission to a college or university. And sometimes it's just starting somewhere else and getting your feet underneath of you, showing them, nothing predicts college success so well as college success, right? So when I see that you've already been handling a college load, that makes me feel like this is going to be a good first step for you or next step for you as far as that's concerned. But Juan threw a couple of things out there that you might be able to reflect on or give a slightly different approach, given that we're digging into nuances here in admissions.
Yeah, I'll start with the latter point. Transfer absolutely is a great route. We have a similar statistic. We're about 25% coming in from the transfer route. We have strong relationships with the community college system within the state. but we're seeing a growing number from other four-year institutions. We're looking at our transfer numbers. But yeah, absolutely. It's a more common route than I think most people realize. And then to just provide a great illustration on here are some of the differences from school to school. We do review by major. And so unlike University of Georgia, we're actually we'll be reviewing you within the context of the major that you're requesting. And so that's going to result in essentially different admissions criteria depending on the major that you're pursuing. And you'll see offer rates vary pretty widely based on the major that you're interested in. So architecture being our most competitive major is going to have a very different offer rate than maybe music or some of the liberal arts majors offered at Virginia Tech. We always tell students not to try to approach this strategically because you're stuck in that major for at least one semester. You really should be pursuing what you're truly interested in. But it does add a great example of just another dynamic that might be approached differently from institution to institution. And we have that in place because we want to make sure that the experience that students are having in their individual majors are ideal and not overloaded or past capacity. And what we were learning under the old system is that engineering for Virginia Tech is a huge pool. We get 19,000 applications just for about 2,000 spots. So if we did a general review, you can imagine that a lot of the students ultimately offered would want just engineering. And it's important that Virginia Tech remain a comprehensive institution with lots of different colleges and majors. And so that's why this process makes a little bit more sense for us because the high level of interest with some of the STEM fields that we're offering. We want to make sure we have a balanced academic community. We have representation from each of the key areas. And we do have some smaller colleges like the College of Natural Resources, which is pretty small. But you'll find each college within universities will have different sizes as well. So the advantage to both of our institutions is, regardless of what you ultimately decide to do, you're going to have a lot of choices. So if you decide to change your mind with the major, although you won't be able to change it till December of your first year for us, and I'm not sure the timeline for UGA, you might be able to do it right away. Regardless of the timeline is, you're not locked into that major. You're able to explore, you're able to take some of these core classes. I think a lot of institutions lately are really pushing for that interdisciplinary experience. It's important that they're going beyond just their key major of study. And it makes sense when you look at some of the key successes in society, whether it's business, product related, whatever you have, you're finding it's coming from those intersections. Look at the iPhone, for instance. That's coming from the intersection of art and technology, right? It's a beautiful thing, but it's also a very functional thing that many of us are addicted to. You're finding that these intersections carry over to students in real world examples, and corporations, companies are looking for students not to be experts in just one area, but to have a strong holistic background. And so it's great to see some of our liberal arts majors, even some of our creative arts students leaving with some coding background or web design background. And seeing all of our majors leave with some sort of business courses under their belt. And I'm sure UGA has lots of examples of that as well, because it's making them a more well-rounded individual, and employers love that. And if they're not looking for employment and are looking to continue their education to either a master's or PhD level, that sort of interdisciplinary is also sought after at that post-secondary level too.
I know we have some questions in the chat that we can start addressing, but I just wanted to tag on there that I couldn't agree with Juan more. We are thoughtfully admitting students because we feel they can be academically successful, full stop. Right? Like I thought for sure I was going to be a doctor, and 22 years later, I'm still an admissions officer. So, what does that tell you in terms of how your life changes and new things you realize as you go through just being a college student. So we are admitting you because we feel like you could be academically successful as well as contribute to our communities, but that doesn't mean that it's a locked in sort of orientation for a particular major or college or skill or whatever it happens to be. There is a question in our chat about that impact and the role undecided, plays. And I guess there's maybe a fear that if I'm not being hyper focused, then colleges are going to think that I don't know what I want to do. And again, most of us have curricula that is designed around making sure students, exactly to Juan's point, have a smattering of all the different parts of higher education while they're getting their feet underneath of them. So undecided is, I don't think, a bad mark. It tends to be the most popular major for our incoming students in a lot of ways. I think that the better question is, if that's the case for your student, look at the schools that you're applying to and see what sort of resources are there for helping students discover what it is that they want to do. And that is maybe the more important sort of investigation that you can do. We have resources on our campus to help students explore and discover, and some of it is required. There are some 1-hour seminar classes that students have to take in their first 2 semesters that allow them to explore any different range of subject materials. There are also resource centers. We're both big schools, and so in a lot of ways that has to be student directed. When I was an undergrad at Washington and Lee, I just happened to have a really good mentor who grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and said, "You are not a biology major, snap out of it. You need to be focused in another area as far as that's concerned." So that's sort of my best advice with undecided as far as that's concerned. But again, look and review what the colleges are telling you. And I know sometimes it feels like we give sort of an answer of, well, it depends, or it doesn't really matter. It's okay to ask maybe a next level question in terms of, okay, if it doesn't matter, then what sort of resources are going to be available to my student, should they not be 100% certain?
I can tackle this other question. What's the best way to make admissions officers aware of students' activities outside of school? Like, for instance, a really great internship. Do admissions officers look at recommendation letters from people other than teachers and counselors? Well, let me tackle that last piece. It's going to vary. I was just on the panel early this morning where one school wanted letters of recommendation only from teachers. Another school only wanted it from counselors. A third school on the panel wanted it from both. And then there's us at Virginia Tech that don't want them at all. We don't use letters of recommendation in our process. So again, this is another example of where it really depends, and making sure you talk to the office and meet all the requirements that they're looking for. That's just another great example of that. And as far as making sure you're highlighting the students' activities, you'll find that on the application, you'll have ample opportunities to do that. There'll be an opportunity to list out the activities outside of school. And you'll see some opportunities for some institutions to talk about it in the short answer or essay questions that they might have. I always give advice that we actually read the whole application. We're not making you go through this torturous long document without reason. So keep that in mind as you're answering the essay questions. If you've already hit on some of your activities, don't feel like you just have to list them out when you're answering one of our short answers or essay questions. Give us a little bit more depth. We see that list, we're aware of it. Give us a little bit more of how it's impacting you, how it's developing you into a better leader, or what key experiences, both positive or negative, that you might have gotten from that involvement. And not every experience is positive, and so being able to reflect on missteps or negative experiences also gives us a little bit of an idea of your overall maturity in reflecting about each of these processes. So yeah, and I know this is going to lead up to almost another question guaranteed, is what do colleges like to see? What sort of involvement? There isn't a magic club that will get you into every college or university. There isn't a key experience that you can have that is a silver bullet. It's truly just pursuing what you're passionate about. It's not quantity over quality. It's pretty evident when you see these lists, when a lot of the involvement, starts late junior year or senior year. It's done because they're aware of applications versus students who are truly involved in stuff because they're passionate about that. And sports count for that. I know a lot of people think that sports aren't going to be helpful in this process, but there's a lot of time commitment in that. And very few continue on to be at that collegiate level of athletics, but there are a lot of key lessons that you can take from athletics that you can also talk about in your essay questions that represent growth and life lessons. And if you're not an athletic person, that's okay too. There's lots of opportunities with clubs and organizations and research experiences sometimes at the high school level. The two in front of you right now, UGA and VT, are big research institutions. We have over $500 million of research taking place on our campuses. So you'll find that the research experience is going to be part of the learning experience on each of our campuses. You'll find that it's common that the professors teaching your students are conducting research as well. And they'll be talking about that research on that first day of class because they're excited about what they are studying and the problems that they're addressing within their field. Many times this is cutting edge stuff. And so I always encourage students to take advantage of those opportunities when the professor asks who's interested in this, especially if it's outside of your major of study, because you can be part of some really cool experiences that can contribute to your overall academic journey while you're at each of our institutions. So again, it doesn't have to just be sports. It doesn't have to be just, traditional clubs and organizations. And then spilling over to leadership, same type of thing. There can only be one class president. So we're not expecting just to see that as that key role. Leadership comes in many ways, and sometimes it's non-traditional ways. If a student is one of many siblings and parents are coming from a low-income background and they're a tough socioeconomic status, and that student is stepping up and helping raise those siblings, then we're going to have a different expectation on what they're doing outside the classroom because of that additional a burden, in essence, that they're carrying. And same with those who work because they have to work. We're not going to expect to see that same level of traditional involvement if we're seeing a high number of work hours. The advantage of getting the volume that we see in applications, and I'm sure the same for UGA, is you see a lot of different scenarios and you're able to make better decisions because of that. It gives you a better understanding of all these different backgrounds that students are coming from.
There's maybe a follow-up question regarding filling up all the white space in the application versus just only listing the ones that you spent the most time on. Like the applications are limited. Most of us do provide the ability to attach or upload a resume, but not everybody does. I think thoughtfully, the application, that section of the application is your best way of communicating to us all the things that we don't normally see on your transcript, for example. And to Juan's point, please do not assume that just because you're in club X, Y, or Z, we know what all the job responsibilities are. Take some time to educate us because we just may not have any idea or never come across that. And you don't know who is going to be reviewing your application as far as that is concerned. So that's an thoughtful part of that conversation. I do think if there's one thing that you did, maybe only for a year, but it was life-changing, that's okay. But give us the context to that as well, so that we are fully aware of what that organization or that activity happened to be. The context piece of this has more and more become really important to us because there is, especially when you get to schools that are being more selective, this flatness in terms of academic profile. So we want to really be mindful that we can find some amazing opportunities of students that are really going to do something on our campus when we go through this process of reading, holistically. So that's all I would sort of throw in there as far as that's concerned. There's a question towards the top here about legacy admissions. I'm happy to tackle it only in so much that UGA hasn't used it in the 20 some odd years that I've worked here. So it's not really a factor. Do we collect the information? Yes, but mostly because folks like Faith that work at the University of Georgia like to have that information available to them, but we're not using it to make an admissions decision in any way, shape, or form. So I don't want to put you on the spot there, Juan, if you've got something that you can or cannot share as far as that's concerned.
We're not using it. We've discontinued it. We haven't used it in the last couple of admission cycles. We weren't as public about that discontinuation of it, but what we learned pretty quickly was the representation of legacy kids in our pool and ultimately in our incoming class didn't really move a lot. So once we stopped utilizing it and saw the representation still maintained, it came pretty clear to us that they don't need any extra help. And that's no surprise. I mean, the value of a Virginia Tech degree leads to a lot of good things. And one of those things is good resources for these students and good schools. And so there's no reason to give additional benefits to a group that's already well positioned in our application process. I just want to add one thing to the filling every slot on the activities section. I learned this recently, and maybe I should have known it already. You can only put 10 activities on the Common App, and the average is 6. And I found this out because a student reached out to me very frustrated that they are cut off at 10. And I had to take a step back and I was like, really, you're doing more than 10? Like significantly involved activities. And so I don't think you should be trying to fill every slot. I've been hearing that a little bit more, like it's something that colleges are looking for, which is why I just self-identified that being an unknown to me. I had no clue there was a limit. And so don't feel like there is this pressure to fill out everything just because it's there. And it's not an expectation of college, as Charles was just hitting on. It's really just about what are you truly involved in and passionate about. I really want to hit this next question, if it's okay with you, Charles. How do you treat applications with test scores versus those without? We're test optional. We've been test optional since COVID, like everyone else in the world who switched to test optional during that time. And so we view them the same. We truly are test optional. So we found that our offer rates are pretty similar between the two groups. What we did find interesting, though, is our yield rates for our test optional students is higher than the yield rate for students who did submit test scores. And what I mean by yield rate is the percentage of students who were offered admission that decided to come to Virginia Tech. And so I thought that was interesting. There are going to be some pockets throughout the country that are sticking with tests because of regulatory reasons or decision-making at higher levels beyond the institution. And that's okay too. What I'm finding is most students are still taking it and they're using it a little bit more strategically. So if they have strong scores, they're submitting it. If not, they're not submitting it. We kind of view both pools the same in our review process. And for us, when looking at the scholarship awarding process, we don't include test scores at all to make sure it's an even process for everyone.
And so as an interesting contrast, University of Georgia falls into one of those schools that have been told by their Board of Regents that they will still be requiring tests. So ourselves, Georgia Tech, and Georgia College and State are required, students are required to submit an exam result officially from one of the two testing agencies in order for their application to be considered complete. What I would mention about that, and somewhat frustrating to me, is that there are students who do have valid scores who choose not to submit them, and that was the only thing keeping their application incomplete. In the grand scheme of things, the test score, while value added, does not predict success on our campus nearly as well as the combination of grades from high school and the types of classes you took to get those grades. Like I've actually seen the written out formula from that the folks at College Board and ACT have helped us develop over time to give us a sort of a benchmarking idea. And the test score, while important, is not nearly as confident in predicting success than how well you do in class for 4 years, every day, showing up, et cetera, et cetera. College is more than a series of 3-hour exams filling in circles. So while we were required to for students to have them in order for their application to be complete, it's not the only marker in town. And it's a good question for families to ask. And I will give you one for free that will stump most college admissions folks, because it totally stumped me when I was asked by a college counselor. A lot of us give middle 50% to give you a range of grades or test scores that students had that were accepted. But the question that you really want to ask is, what was the percentage of students that fell within both those ranges? They had both the grades and the test scores. We have plenty of students who had the grades. We have plenty of students who had the test scores, but both, it was actually a pretty small percentage of the overall admitted population, which means that we are taking students on either edge of that middle 50%. We really mean it when we say this is a guide. It's not written in stone that you must be between X and Y in order to be admitted as far as that's concerned. So be thoughtful of that when dealing with those things, and be mindful that institutions are going to continue to vary. There's a question about the impact it's going to have going forward. I think we're going to continue to have a probably pretty significant changing landscape, especially as more students are looking at test optional schools as a good potential fit for themselves. At the end of the day, I think Juan and I want to make sure that college admissions is available to as many students as possible. And so instead of reducing avenues, we want to increase them as far as that's concerned, even where I'm constrained in what I'm required for students to do. So.
Let's see the next question. If an applicant is not accepted during early decision, can their application be continued to standard admission? It's going to be another, it depends. I would say the vast majority of institutions do have a defer process. So the student at early decision can get offered, they can be denied, or they can be deferred. But at a panel this morning, I learned that there's an institution in Virginia that is no longer deferring. So they're making a final decision at early decision. So again, it really does depend, and it's making sure you're checking out the school and asking those questions to each of the schools on the list of your students, wish list of schools to attend there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the other questions regarding timing. It does depend on a particular institution. If you choose to do early action, it's non-binding, but you feel like, I guess the sort of the sentiment that I led with, that if you really feel like I've got all of my material together, my application feels complete to me, I'm giving the best sort of version of myself to the college or university, and I just want to know where I stand, because I've got several colleges that I'm considering, and to know something would be a benefit. That certainly is one of the reasons why early action is a good choice for a lot of students, as far as that's concerned. The realities are that some of our acceptance rates do vary wildly in a given year, especially because it really depends on what the quality of the particular pool was for early action versus regular decision. Where was the growth? If you are a state institution like ourselves, maybe you have a mission to make sure that you're enrolling more students from in-state. So perhaps either early or regular, there's a little bit of interest in making sure we're fulfilling that aspect of our admissions mission, if you will. So I realize it's unnerving because it's not standardized or static, and it will vary from year to year as far as that's concerned. My experience has been that we tend to get Well, when I started off doing this back in the turn of the century, the reality was we got our most excellent applications during early action. That has changed over time. And sometimes that changes because the school's profile has changed. And now suddenly, while we are a school of choice for a lot of students applying early action, we're kind of a backup school for some students that are really shooting for schools that are even more considered more prestigious as far as that is concerned. Maybe have a more prestigious program that the student is interested in. So it's going to vary from year to year as far as that is concerned. So really be mindful and understand that those things do change from one year to the next as far as percentages and rates. They're good guideposts, but they, neither of us have any control over whether we get 30,000 applications or we get 60,000 applications. It could, anything can happen that suddenly increases a school's rate of application for whatever reason. And so we are mindful that that changes over time as well.
A question about AP scores. If a student gets a 3 on an AP exam, is it worth reporting on their application? I think it is. It's going to vary. Again, it depends on what sort of credit you might get for that. For Virginia Tech, most are going to be 4s and 5s, but we do offer credit for some 3s, depending on the subject area. And so I would recommend making sure you're putting it in there. Most colleges, universities are going to show their tables as far as what credit will be allotted based on AP or IB or whatever other dual enrollment in some cases. If you want to check that, I would say the majority of schools don't necessarily utilize AP scores in their review process. They take note on the rigor of your courses, so you're getting credit for being in the AP class, and that's showing additional rigor, which colleges love to see. We weigh rigor just as much as grades in our process because it's such a strong predictor of how students are going to do once they arrive in college, and that's a key component to retention rate. I struggle to think of too many institutions that actually utilize AP exams as part of their process, because the challenge is most of the AP exams you're taking are going to be coming senior year. Although there's a growing number tackling more junior year, and we've definitely seen that in our applicant pool. There's a huge chunk that you won't see in time senior year to really integrate it within your review process. Charles, I'm not sure if it's different with you all or in your region of the country.
It's a great question, in so much that we are also more interested that you have been taking on challenges, and I'm probably more interested in what the actual grade was that you made, whether or not you got a 2 or a 4. It doesn't really necessarily play a role. I think this is another area, and Juan, if we ever do a panel together, I promise I'm going to bring a like a swear jar, but it'll say "it depends" on it, because that's just the reality of college admissions in the United States, But the point I was trying to make is that we spend time learning the context of your high school as well. We try to express sometimes that we want students to take the most rigorous course curriculum that is available to them, but also that's appropriate to them. So making a D in AP Calculus BC really isn't that impressive to us, right? We are more interested that you are taking on challenges that are appropriate for you, that you can be successful in. And a lot of times schools are now communicating to us what the limits are. So I promise you, colleges are trying to get out of the habit of saying, well, I'm just going to go through and count how many AP courses this student has, because that must mean that they're really smart. It's more of a, where did you challenge yourself? Were there limitations placed upon you? Maybe thoughtfully so. I think a lot of high schools, we've seen that a lot from some of the private high schools in Atlanta, saying, our kids are so burnt that by the time they get to college, they're kind of disinterested because they felt like they had to take on a dozen AP classes by the time they graduate just to be competitive. And more of us are finding that it does us no good to make that admissions decision only to have the student to drop out after the first semester. It doesn't prove retention. It proves that you could handle that for a short period of time in your life. So context is important as well. Does your school place a limit on that? Do you have to get a teacher's recommendation? We want to know that information, and students and your college counseling office help us understand that as well. I think we are getting ready to wrap up. But Juan, any other pearls of wisdom you want to impart on folks before we turn it back to Faith?
Just reemphasizing what I said earlier, take advantage of our teams. We're here to help. We recognize how stressful this process can be. It doesn't need to be, but it can end up being that way. And so, if you're hearing something from your neighbor or friends, or you're wondering about how something works, don't go to them as resources. They might be a graduate of our school, but that might be from 30 years ago. The process has changed quite a bit, especially most recently. Utilize our teams. There's so many good ways to reach us now. And a lot of us are increasing our social media presence to make sure that we're pumping out information that's relevant to this process. But you'll have so many opportunities to interact with us, whether it's at college fairs in your area, or doing our visit to our campus, or we're visiting at the high school over there. Or we have virtual programs. You'll find that there's many opportunities to connect with us. Please don't be intimidated from taking advantage of that. I promise you, getting the real information, getting the right information will most definitely reduce the anxiety associated with this process.
Yeah, great. Thanks everyone for their time. I'm going to turn it back over to Faith for her closing remark.
Thank you all so much for everything you've done today, the wisdom you've shared. We really appreciate it. I know my team appreciates it, and I can only imagine how much our alumni base appreciates it. And I also want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. Please be sure to look out for emails regarding the other 2 sessions we have coming up this fall. On September 16th, we will have a webinar on the topic of choosing where to apply, deciding what matters to you and your student. And I know Juan talked about this a little earlier about his experiences and now going through the college application process with his child. So you may want to join that just to help understand a bit more about what matters to you and your student as you're picking institutions. And on October 2nd, we will have a webinar series on the Common App with a few of the current professionals working there. The registration for these webinars can be found in the link I just provided, as well as the recording for this webinar, as well as the following 2. That is it for today's session, and I hope you all have a great afternoon, and thank you all again so much.